My name is Miranda Lowell. Last quarter, they dragged my name through the mud in front of 40 global partners. This quarter, I made one phone call that froze the $75 million contract funding their entire bonus pool. You want to know how a single signature can kill a crooked empire? Buckle up, this is corporate revenge done right. The mahogany conference table stretched across the 40th floor of Aurelia Systems headquarters like a polished runway for executive egos. I'd sat at this table hundreds of times over my 8 years with the company, but never quite like this. Never with my career hanging by a thread while Oliver Shaw, our newly appointed CEO, performed his carefully choreographed character assassination. Miranda's performance has been adequate, Oliver said, his pause calculated to draw blood. But adequate isn't what Aurelia Systems needs in our international market development division. Not when we're positioning ourselves for the Harbinger Fund integration. 40 pairs of eyes turned to me. Partners from London, Tokyo, Singapore, New York, people I'd built relationships with over years of late-night calls and cross-continental flights. People who trusted my word when I promised them our fintech platform could revolutionize their infrastructure investment processes. Oliver wasn't finished. Which is why, effective immediately, Miranda will be transitioning to a supporting role. Marcus Whitfield will be taking over as Director of International Market Development. Marcus Whitfield, Oliver's golf buddy from his previous company, a man who thought blockchain was a type of construction material 6 months ago. The conference room felt like it was tilting. I kept my face neutral, professional. 8 years of navigating corporate politics had taught me that showing weakness in moments like these was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. I'm sure Miranda will provide Marcus with all the necessary documentation for a smooth transition. Oliver continued, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. After all, we're all team players here at Aurelia. Team players. The phrase tasted like ash in my mouth. Kenji Tanaka from the Tokyo office caught my eye. His expression was carefully blank, but I saw the question there. The Harbinger Fund deal $400 million in infrastructure investment that would flow through our platform had been my baby from conception. I'd spent 18 months building the relationships, understanding the Byzantine compliance requirements, crafting the technical specifications that would make Aurelia the only logical choice for their digital transformation. The meeting continued for another hour. Oliver outlined his vision for Aurelia's future, which seemed to consist mainly of buzzwords he'd memorized from a management consultant's PowerPoint. I sat there, taking notes I'd never read, maintaining the facade of the consummate professional even as my career imploded in real time. When it finally ended, I packed my leather portfolio with deliberate calm. Several partners approached me with careful condolences disguised as small talk. Heinrich Mueller from the Frankfurt office gripped my hand a beat too long. "This is unexpected, Miranda," he said quietly. "Very unexpected." I made it to my office, my former office, I supposed before allowing myself a moment to process what had just happened. The view from the 32nd floor showed Manhattan in all its glittering indifference. Somewhere down there, in one of those countless buildings, someone else was probably getting screwed over by corporate politics. But knowing I wasn't alone in the experience didn't make it hurt any less. My assistant, Janet, appeared in the doorway. She'd been crying. "Miranda, I'm so sorry. This is bullshit and everyone knows it." "It's business, Janet," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "It's always just business." But it wasn't just business. It was personal. Oliver Shaw had waltzed into Aurelia 6 months ago with his Harvard MBA and his connections to the board, and he'd systematically begun replacing anyone who might challenge his authority. I'd been naive enough to think my track record would protect me. The Harbinger Fund deal alone should have made me untouchable. Unless that was exactly why he needed me gone. The thought crystallized as I started packing my office. Oliver didn't just want me out of the way, he needed me out of the way. But why? What was it about the Harbinger Fund deal that made my removal necessary? I pulled up the contract on my computer, scrolling through the dense legal language I'd memorized months ago. Everything looked normal until I reached Section 47B. The payment authorization protocols. My name was hard-coded into the approval chain for the second phase of funding. Not my title, not my position, my actual name, Miranda Lowell. It was a detail I'd insisted on after watching too many deals go sideways when key personnel changed. The Harbinger Fund's legal team had agreed because they trusted me personally. They'd wanted assurance that the person who understood their needs would oversee the implementation. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Whitfield. "Hi, Miranda. Oliver mentioned you'd be helping with the transition. Could we meet tomorrow at 9 a.m.? I'll need all your files on the Harbinger deal ASAP." I stared at the message, then at Section 47B on my screen. Without my signature. The second phase of funding $75 million scheduled for release in 6 weeks couldn't proceed. They could demote me, humiliate me, even fire me. But they couldn't forge my signature on a document that would be scrutinized by some of the world's most meticulous financial auditors. "Actually, Marcus," I typed back, "I think we should meet with legal present. There are some contractual complexities you'll need to understand." His response was almost immediate. "Is that really necessary? I'm sure we can handle a simple handover between ourselves." Simple handover. If Marcus thought the Harbinger Fund deal was simple, he was even more out of his depth than I'd imagined. Or maybe that was the point. Maybe Oliver needed someone pliable. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions when irregularities started appearing in the implementation. I closed my laptop and finished packing. Let them think I was going quietly. Let them think they'd won. But I'd spent 8 years learning how this game was played, and Oliver Shaw had just made a critical error. He'd humiliated me in front of the people whose respect I'd earned through years of hard work. He'd stripped me of my position without understanding the legal frameworks I'd put in place, and most importantly, he'd underestimated me. As I carried my box of belongings past Janet's desk, she looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "What are you going to do?" "My job," I said. "I'm going to do my job." She looked confused, but I didn't elaborate. Oliver thought he'd neutralized a threat to his power. What he'd actually done was create an enemy with nothing left to lose and everything she needed to bring his house of cards crashing down. The elevator descended in smooth silence, 32 floors of calculated humiliation behind me, but I wasn't leaving Aurelia Systems defeated. I was leaving with knowledge, with access, and with a burning clarity about what needed to happen next. Oliver Shaw wanted to play corporate politics. Fine, but he should have made sure he understood all the rules before he decided to change the game. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made Manhattan feel like a city of infinite possibilities. I'd spent the night poring over every document related to the Harbinger Fund deal, building a mental map of dependencies, deadlines, and most importantly, vulnerabilities. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m., emails from various partners expressing their surprise at yesterday's announcement, a few carefully worded messages suggesting coffee or lunch when I had time, the corporate equivalent of vulture circling, trying to determine if I still had value worth cultivating. I ignored them all except one. Yuki Sato from Harbinger Fund's legal department had sent a single line, "We need to talk, privately." I met her at a coffee shop in the financial district, one of those aggressively generic chains where half of Wall Street conducted their unofficial business. Yuki was already there, her usual immaculate appearance slightly frayed around the edges. "Miranda," she said without preamble, "what the hell is going on at Aurelia?" "Oliver Shaw is consolidating power," I replied, matching her directness. "I'm collateral damage." She stirred her coffee with unnecessary violence. "Do you know what this means for our deal?" "I know exactly what it means." I pulled out my phone and showed her Section 47B. "Which is why I'm guessing you're here." Yuki's expression shifted from frustration to calculation. "Can they work around this?" "They can try. They could attempt to argue that my role change invalidates the clause. But we both know how Judge Patterson feels about contract modifications that conveniently benefit one party. Judge Patterson, the mere mention of the federal judge who'd be overseeing any disputes related to the Harbinger Fund contract made Yuki wince. He was notorious for his literal interpretation of contracts, and his disdain for what he called creative corporate restructuring. "What does Oliver want?" Yuki asked. That was the million-dollar question. "I have theories, but I need more information before I can be certain." "What kind of information?" I leaned back, studying her. Yuki and I had worked together for over a year. She was sharp, ethical, and most importantly, she had as much to lose as I did if this deal went sideways. The Harbinger Fund integration was her baby as much as it was mine. "The kind that might make both of us uncomfortable," I said finally. "The kind that might reveal things about Aurelia systems that certain people would prefer to keep hidden." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My boss called me last night, after your demotion was announced. He wanted to know if we should reconsider the Aurelia partnership. And I told him we should wait, that you were too smart to go down without a plan." She met my eyes. "I was right, wasn't I?" "That depends on whether you're willing to help me." "Help you with what, exactly?" "Ensuring that the Harbinger Fund's money is used exactly as intended. Nothing more, nothing less." Yuki's smile was sharp. "You think Oliver has other plans for our 400 million? I think Oliver Shaw didn't orchestrate my public humiliation just to bring in his golf buddy. There's a reason he needs me specifically out of the way, and it's connected to your fund's money." "That's a serious accusation." "Which is why I need proof before I make it." I finished my coffee. "Are you in?" She didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "Access to any communication between Oliver and your board members, especially anything off the official channels." "That's highly irregular, potentially career-ending, yes." I stood. "But so is letting $400 million disappear into someone's offshore accounts." Yuki's face went pale. "You think he's planning to steal from the fund?" "I think Oliver Shaw didn't get where he is by playing nice. And I think your board should be very, very careful about who they trust with their money." I left her there, staring at her coffee like it might contain answers. The first piece was in play. Now I needed to work on the internal angle. Janet was waiting for me at a wine bar in Midtown, fidgeting with her phone. My former assistant looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past 24 hours. "This is crazy," she said as soon as I sat down. "Meeting like this, if Oliver finds out..." "Oliver's too busy measuring his new office to worry about what the little people are doing," I said. "Besides, you're not my assistant anymore. We're just two friends having drinks." She laughed, but it sounded brittle. "Friends, right. Friends who might be committing corporate espionage. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, Janet, just observant." "What kind of observant?" I signaled the bartender. "The kind that notices when meetings aren't logged in the official calendar, when documents are printed after hours, when certain executives have conversations they don't want recorded." Janet's fingers drummed against the bar. "Marcus was in your office for 3 hours today. He had me pull all the Harbinger files, but he seemed frustrated, kept muttering about unnecessary complications." "Did he say anything specific?" "He made a call, speakerphone, because he's an idiot. I heard Oliver's voice. Something about accelerating the timeline and finding workarounds." Workarounds, in corporate speak. That usually meant bending rules until they broke. "Janet, I need you to understand something. What's happening here is bigger than my career. If Oliver's planning what I think he's planning, it could destroy Aurelia. The SEC doesn't look kindly on executives who treat client funds like personal piggy banks." Her eyes widened. "You think he's going to steal from Harbinger?" "I think Oliver Shaw has a history of leaving companies right before they implode from financial irregularities. Hartford Dynamics, Meridian Capital, Sterling Innovations, all had mysterious losses discovered months after Oliver moved on to his next position." "How do you know this?" "Because unlike Oliver, I do my homework." I pulled out a folder I'd compiled over the past year, when Oliver first appeared on Aurelia's radar. "Look at the pattern. He comes in, restructures the leadership, implements new efficiency protocols, and then exits with a golden parachute just before the auditors find the holes." Janet flipped through the documents, her face growing paler with each page. "This is... How has he not been caught?" "Because he's smart. He always ensures someone else's fingerprints are on the actual crimes, which is why he needs Marcus in my position. Marcus is just stupid enough to follow orders without questioning them and just greedy enough to think he's getting a good deal. So what do? We let them think they're winning. Oliver wants the Harbinger funds released early. He's going to push for modifications to the payment schedule, probably citing market opportunities that require immediate capital deployment. Marcus will sign off on it because he doesn't understand why the original timeline was structured the way it was. But you won't sign? I smiled. Oh, I'll sign, eventually, after certain conditions are met. What conditions? The kind that ensure every penny is tracked, every transaction is transparent, and every decision has a paper trail that leads straight back to Oliver Shaw's desk. Janet finished her wine in one gulp. He'll destroy you for this, really destroy you, not just professionally. Probably, I signaled for another round. But here's the thing about being publicly humiliated, it's surprisingly liberating. He's already taken my job, my reputation, my future at Aurelia. What else can he do? I can think of a few things, Janet muttered. Which is why you're going to be careful. Nothing traceable, nothing that could be construed as theft of proprietary information. Just stay alert, and maybe update your resume. Things are going to get ugly before they get better. She nodded slowly. I've been recording the meetings, not intentionally. It's just, the new conference room system automatically archives everything for compliance. Oliver doesn't know. He had IT disable it in his office, but not the general conference rooms. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I felt the first real spark of hope. Interesting. Miranda, be careful, please. Oliver's not just some corporate climbing shark. There's something genuinely wrong with him, the way he talks about people, like they're just obstacles to be removed. I know. I'd seen it in his eyes yesterday, that moment of satisfaction when he'd announced my demotion. It wasn't just business for him either, it was sport. Which is why I'm not going to fight him on his terms. He expects corporate warfare, lawyers, threats, negotiations. What he's going to get is simple, clean adherence to contractual obligations. You're going to bore him to death. I'm going to give him exactly what he thinks he wants, my cooperation, right up until the moment he realizes that my cooperation comes with conditions that will destroy everything he's trying to build. We parted ways outside the bar. Janet headed back to her apartment in Queens, and I walked the streets of Manhattan, thinking Oliver had made his move. He'd established the battlefield, thinking he'd already won. But every general knows that the most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Heinrich Muller. I'm in New York unexpectedly. Perhaps we could discuss the Harbinger implementation over breakfast. I have concerns. Heinrich, conservative, methodical. Heinrich, who'd once spent 3 hours questioning me about a single clause in a derivatives contract. If he had concerns, Oliver's problems were about to multiply. Tomorrow, 7 a.m., the Carlisle, I responded. And Heinrich, bring your concerns, all of them. The pieces were moving into position. Oliver thought he'd checkmated me with that public demotion. What he'd actually done was free me from the constraints of corporate hierarchy. I no longer had to play nice. No longer had to consider my future at Aurelia. No longer had to pretend that this was all just business. Because sometimes, in the gleaming towers of Manhattan, business was war, and Oliver Shaw had just declared it on the wrong person. The Carlisle's breakfast room hummed with the quiet power of old money and new deals. Heinrich Muller sat across from me, his usually stoic expression troubled. He'd ordered black coffee and dry toast, the breakfast of a man with something weighing on his mind. Miranda, he began without preamble. I've been in banking for 30 years. I've seen hostile takeovers, corporate raids, even a few spectacular frauds. But what's happening at Aurelia? He shook his head. This feels different. Different how? He pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. 3 days ago, Oliver Shaw reached out to my board. Privately, He suggested that the European allocation of the Harbinger Fund might be better served through a different structure, one that would bypass the controls we spent months establishing. I studied the email chain. Oliver's language was carefully crafted, all suggestion and implication, but the meaning was clear. He wanted to restructure the fund flow to create opportunities for what he called strategic reallocation. He's testing the waters, I said, seeing who might be willing to play ball. The thing is, Miranda, some of my board members are interested. The returns he's promising are substantial. Of course they are. It's easy to promise spectacular returns when you're planning to cook the books. I handed back the tablet. What did you tell them? That any modifications to the Harbinger structure would need approval from all original signatories, including you. He paused. Oliver seemed surprised by that information. He shouldn't be. It's in the contract. Yes, but I get the impression Mr. Shaw isn't accustomed to reading contracts. He's more used to having lawyers find ways around them. I sipped my coffee, thinking, Heinrich, what do you know about Oliver's previous positions? What everyone knows: Harvard MBA, stint at McKinsey, senior roles at several technology firms, a golden boy, as you Americans say. What everyone knows is what Oliver wants them to know. What about Hartford Dynamics? Heinrich frowned. The medical technology firm, they had some financial difficulties a few years ago. Financial difficulties that began 6 months after Oliver left for his next opportunity. $40 million in investment funds that couldn't be accounted for. The CFO took the fall, claimed it was poor investment strategies. But the CFO was Oliver's hand-picked successor. You're suggesting a pattern. I'm suggesting that Oliver Shaw has perfected a very specific type of corporate theft. He comes in as the savior, restructures operations, creates new investment opportunities that require liquid capital, and then ensures someone else is holding the bag when the music stops. Heinrich's toast remained untouched. If this is true, why hasn't he been caught? Because he's careful, because he chooses his targets well, companies in transition, boards eager for quick returns, industries where complex financial instruments can hide a multitude of sins, and because he always has a fall guy. Marcus Whitfield. Among others, Oliver surrounds himself with people just competent enough to follow instructions, but not smart enough to understand the full picture. When things go wrong, they're the ones with their signatures on the documents. Heinrich was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? Nothing that compromises your position, just vigilance, and maybe a few strategic questions at the next board meeting, the kind of detailed, technical questions that Oliver won't be able to deflect with charm and buzzwords. The kind of questions you taught me to ask. I smiled. Exactly. Miranda, I have to ask, is this about revenge for what he did to you? I considered the question. It started that way, the humiliation, the public nature of it. Yes, I wanted to hurt him back, but then I started looking closer at why he needed me gone, and I realized this is bigger than my bruised ego. He's planning to steal from Harbinger. Heinrich, $400 million that's meant for infrastructure development in emerging markets, schools, hospitals, clean water systems, that's what's at stake here. And your career is already over at Aurelia. Oliver made sure of that. But I'll be damned if I let him destroy everything I've built while lining his pockets. Heinrich finally took a bite of his toast. You know, in Frankfurt, we have a saying, the patient hunter gets the fattest deer. Meaning Oliver Shaw thinks he's the hunter in this scenario. But you've been patient, Miranda. You've built relationships, understood systems, created safeguards. Perhaps it's time he learned what it feels like to be prey. After Heinrich left, I had 3 more meetings scheduled, each with a different stakeholder in the Harbinger deal, each with their own concerns about the sudden leadership change at Aurelia. By noon, I'd painted a picture that had them all asking the same question: could they trust Oliver Shaw with their money? The answer, increasingly, was no. But I needed more than doubt. I needed proof. Which was why my next stop was the one place Oliver would never expect to find me, Aurelia Systems itself. The security guard did a double take when I walked into the lobby. "Ms. Lowell, I thought you were—" "Taking some time off," I said smoothly, holding up my still active security badge. "Just need to grab some personal items from storage." He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, you know the way." The thing about corporate security is that it's designed to keep outsiders out, not to monitor every movement of someone who's been inside for 8 years. My badge still worked. My biometrics were still in the system. And most importantly, I knew exactly where Oliver Shaw would never think to look for sensitive information. The archives. Aurelia, like most financial firms, was required to maintain physical copies of certain documents. These were stored in a climate-controlled basement room that most employees forgot existed. It was the domain of Raj Patel, a quiet man who'd been with the company since its founding and who had an eidetic memory for every document that passed through his hands. "Miranda." Raj looked genuinely pleased to see me. "I heard about, well, corporate politics, eh? Something like that. Raj, I'm actually here on a bit of unofficial business." His expression sharpened. Raj had survived 30 years of corporate upheavals by knowing when not to ask questions. "What do you need?" "Oliver Shaw's personnel file. The complete one, not the sanitized version HR shows to the board." Raj's fingers flew over his keyboard. "That's technically restricted." "Raj, you've known me for 8 years. Have I ever asked you for anything that wasn't in the company's best interests?" He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. 10 minutes. That's all I can give you." "That's all I need." The file was thicker than I'd expected. Oliver's official resume was there, of course, all polish and achievement, but behind it were the reference checks, the background investigations, the quiet inquiries that companies make when hiring senior executives. And there, buried on page 47, was what I'd been looking for. A memo from a private investigator, dated 6 months before Oliver was hired. It detailed inconsistencies in his employment history, questions about his departure from Hartford Dynamics, and most damning, a note about an SEC inquiry that had been quietly dropped after key witnesses became unavailable. I took photos of everything, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was the ammunition I needed, but it was also dangerous. If Oliver discovered I had this information— "Miranda," Raj's voice was urgent. "Someone's coming." I closed the file, slipping my phone back into my pocket, just as footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door opened, and Marcus Whitfield walked in, looking harried. "Miranda, what are you doing here?" "Collecting some research materials I'd stored," I said calmly. "Historical analysis of fund structures. Thought it might help with your transition." His expression shifted from suspicion to eagerness. "Oh, excellent. Actually, I've been meaning to ask you about Section 47B. The signature requirement." I kept my voice neutral. "What about it?" "Oliver seems to think there might be ways to streamline the approval process, for efficiency." "I'm sure he does." I moved toward the door. "But Marcus, a word of advice. When dealing with 400 million of other people's money, efficiency is less important than accuracy, and legality." His face flushed. "I don't appreciate the implication." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. The Harbinger Fund has very specific requirements for fund disbursement, requirements that exist for a reason. I suggest you familiarize yourself with them before Oliver asks you to do something you'll regret." I left him standing there, mouth open, probably trying to decide whether to be offended or worried. With any luck, he'd be both. The elevator ride up felt endless. I'd gotten what I came for. But being back in the building, seeing the familiar faces, remembering what I'd lost, it stirred emotions I'd been keeping carefully controlled. As the doors opened on the ground floor, I nearly collided with someone getting on. Oliver Shaw himself, looking polished and predatory in his $5,000 suit. "Miranda." His smile was all teeth. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Just tying up some loose ends," I said, matching his tone. "You know how it is. 8 years creates a lot of attachments." "I'm sure it does." His eyes narrowed slightly. I trust you're not having difficulty with the transition Marcus mentioned. You've been helpful. I've always been a team player, Oliver. You said so yourself. Yes, I did. He stepped into the elevator, but held the door. Miranda, a word of advice. Sometimes the smartest thing to do is to recognize when a chapter has ended. Clinging to the past can be unhealthy. I couldn't agree more, I said. In fact, I've been doing some reading about the past lately. It's amazing what you can learn from history. Patterns tend to repeat themselves, don't they? Something flickered in his eyes. Just for a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw what Janet had seen, something cold and calculating and utterly without conscience. Enjoy your day, Miranda, he said finally, letting the doors close. I walked out of Aurelia Systems for what I knew would be the last time. My phone heavy with evidence and my mind racing with possibilities. Oliver thought he'd warned me off. What he'd actually done was confirm my suspicions. The war was no longer cold. The question now was who would strike the decisive blow first. That evening, I met Yuki at her apartment in Tribeca. She texted that she had information but didn't trust discussing it anywhere public. When she opened the door, I could see why. How many board members? I asked, looking at the documents spread across her dining table. 4, maybe 5. She handed me a glass of wine with shaking hands. Oliver's been approaching them individually, offering them preferential terms on a special investment opportunity that would run parallel to the main fund. I studied the emails she'd printed. Oliver was careful, never putting anything explicitly illegal in writing, but the implication was clear play ball with his restructuring plans, and there would be personal benefits. This is bribery, I said. This is how business gets done at the highest levels, Yuki corrected. The problem is, some of them are interested. The returns he's promising are impossible without fraud. I set down the papers. Yuki, we need to move faster than I thought. If he gets enough board members on his side, they could vote to restructure the entire deal. My signature requirement won't matter if they dissolve the original agreement. Can they do that? With enough votes and the right legal maneuvering. Yes, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. We need to raise the stakes, make it too risky for the board members to side with Oliver. How? By making sure they understand exactly who they're getting into bed with. I found the number I was looking for. Remember that SEC inquiry I mentioned, the one that was dropped? I think it's time someone took another look at it. Yuki's eyes widened. You're going to the SEC? Not directly. That would take months we don't have. But I know a journalist who specializes in financial crime. She's been looking for a story like this for years. Miranda, if this goes public, then Oliver's house of cards collapses, along with anyone stupid enough to stand too close to him. I made the call. Sarah Chen answered on the second ring. Miranda Lowell, I was wondering when you'd call. You heard about Aurelia. I hear about everything interesting in the financial sector. Your dramatic demotion made quite a few waves. The question is, why are you calling me? Because the story behind my demotion is one you'll want to tell. How does CEO with a history of financial fraud attempts to steal $400 million in infrastructure funds sound for a headline? There was a pause. I'm listening. I gave her the broad strokes. Oliver's pattern, the Harbinger Fund, the current attempts to restructure the deal. Sarah was too good a journalist to commit without seeing evidence, but I could hear the interest in her voice. If even half of what you're suggesting is true, she said. It's all true, and I have the documentation to prove it. But Sarah, timing is everything. I need this story to break at exactly the right moment. Which is, the moment Oliver thinks he's won, the moment he's convinced the board to restructure, when he's ready to move the money, that's when we pull the trigger. You're playing a dangerous game, Miranda. No, I corrected. Oliver's playing a dangerous game. I'm just making sure he loses. After I hung up, Yuki was staring at me. You've changed, she said quietly. The Miranda I knew a year ago would have fought this through proper channels. Legal letters, board meetings, corporate procedures. That Miranda got publicly humiliated and professionally destroyed for playing by the rules, I said. This Miranda understands that sometimes the only way to fight a snake is to be a mongoose. And if it doesn't work, if Oliver figures out what you're doing. I thought about the look in his eyes in the elevator, that cold, calculating assessment. He was already suspicious. The question was whether I could move faster than he could. Then at least I'll go down fighting, I said. But Yuki, I don't intend to lose. Oliver made a crucial mistake when he demolished me publicly. He created an enemy with nothing left to lose and gave her all the motivation she needed to dig into his past. That's corporate strategy 101. Never create a martyr. My phone buzzed. A text from Janet. Emergency board meeting called for Monday. Oliver's pushing for an immediate vote on restructuring. You need to see the attached. I opened the attachment. It was a memo from Oliver to the board, outlining his vision for the Harbinger Fund. The language was corporate doublespeak at its finest, but the meaning was clear. He wanted to redirect the funds through a series of shell companies that would make tracking the money nearly impossible. Monday, I said. 4 days. That's our timeline. Yuki poured herself another glass of wine. What do you need me to do? Stall, raise every procedural question you can think of. Demand documentation. Be the bureaucratic nightmare Oliver thinks I used to be. And you. I'm going to make sure that by Monday morning, every board member knows exactly what kind of man they're about to trust with $400 million. I gathered the documents. Oliver wanted to play corporate politics. He's about to learn that revenge, like compound interest, grows exponentially when properly invested. The weekend that followed was a blur of phone calls, document reviews, and strategic planning. I worked from my apartment, transforming my living room into a war room. Charts covered the walls showing the web of connections between Oliver's previous companies and the financial irregularities that followed his departures. By Sunday evening, I had everything I needed. The pattern was clear, the evidence damning, and the implications terrifying for anyone associated with Oliver Shaw. All that remained was the execution. My phone rang just after midnight, an unknown number. Ms. Lowell. The voice was unfamiliar, nervous. This is David Kim from Sterling Innovations. I heard you've been asking questions about Oliver Shaw. Sterling Innovations. Oliver's position before Aurelia. The one with the least public information about his departure. I might have made some inquiries, I said carefully. I was the CFO there. When Oliver was head of strategic development, his voice dropped. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask the right questions. What kind of questions? The kind about why $30 million in allocated development funds ended up in offshore accounts that no one could trace. The kind about why I was asked to sign documents I wasn't allowed to read. The kind about why Oliver left 2 weeks before our annual audit with a hefty bonus while I was left to explain the discrepancies. My heart rate accelerated. Mr. Kim, would you be willing to go on record with this information? I have a family. Oliver has connections. Oliver is about to attempt the same thing at Aurelia Systems. But with $400 million this time, how many families will suffer if that money disappears? There was a long silence. Then, what do you need? Documents, if you have them, a sworn statement at minimum, and Mr. Kim, you won't be alone. I'm building a case that will ensure Oliver Shaw never does this again. He destroyed my career, David said quietly. Made sure I couldn't get another CFO position. Said I was incompetent, that the losses were my fault. Then help me help me show the world what he really is. Send me the details. I'll think about it. He hung up, but I knew he'd come through. The pain in his voice was too raw, too familiar. Oliver had a talent for destroying people who got in his way. What he'd never considered was what happened when those people found each other. By Monday morning, I was ready. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 8 a.m., I sent an email to every board member of both Aurelia Systems and the Harbinger Fund. The subject line was simple: due diligence materials for your consideration. The attachments included Oliver's complete employment history with highlighted discrepancies, financial records from Hartford Dynamics showing the missing $40 million, David Kim's sworn affidavit about Sterling Innovations, a timeline showing how Oliver's departures consistently preceded major financial scandals, a preview of Sarah Chen's article, scheduled to publish at 10:15 a.m. I ended the email with a simple message. As the designated signatory for Phase 2 of the Harbinger Fund disbursement, I have a fiduciary duty to ensure all funds are handled with appropriate oversight. I cannot and will not authorize any payments under a restructured agreement that lacks proper controls. I trust you will consider this information before making any decisions about Aurelia's leadership or the Harbinger partnership. Then I waited. The first call came at 8:17 a.m. Heinrich Müller. Miranda, is this all verified? Every word. Heinrich, Sarah Chen has been fact-checking for 48 hours. It's solid. Mein Gott, we almost gave him exactly what he wanted, but not quite. The second call was from Yuki. The Harbinger board is in chaos. Half of them want to pull the deal entirely. Let them panic for a bit, then remind them that the original agreement, the one I'm happy to honor, protects their interests completely. By 9:30, my phone was ringing constantly. Board members, partners, even a few journalists who'd gotten wind of the story. I ignored them all except one. Oliver Shaw. You think you're clever, he said without preamble. I think I'm thorough, I corrected. There's a difference. This won't stop me. I'll sue you for defamation, theft of proprietary information, violation of your NDA. Oliver, did you really think I'd move without legal cover? Every document I've shared was either publicly available or provided by whistleblowers. As for defamation, truth is an absolute defense. You've destroyed your career. No one will hire you after this. Probably not, I agreed. But then again, you already took care of that, didn't you? When you decided to humiliate me in front of 40 global partners, you freed me from having to care about my corporate future. This is about your ego, your hurt feelings. No, Oliver, this is about the pension funds that would have lost millions, the infrastructure projects that would never have been built, the hospitals and schools in emerging markets that need that money. You were going to steal from them to line your own pockets, and I'm stopping you. You can't prove? I don't have to. David Kim already did. Hartford Dynamics already did. The SEC investigators who are about to reopen their inquiry will do the rest. I just had to connect the dots. There was silence on the line. Then, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard, you've made a powerful enemy, Miranda. No, Oliver. I've exposed a common thief who dressed up his crimes in corporate doublespeak, and in about 15 minutes, the whole world will know it too. He hung up. At 10:15 a.m., Sarah Chen's article went live. Pattern of fraud. How one executive's financial shell game spans 3 companies and $100 million in losses. By 10:30 a.m., Aurelia's stock price had dropped 12%. By 11:00 a.m., the board had called an emergency meeting without Oliver Shaw. By noon, Oliver's resignation was announced. To pursue other opportunities, the carefully worded press release fooled no one. I was sitting in my apartment, watching the news coverage, when my phone rang. Marcus Whitfield. Miranda, I wanted to apologize. I had no idea what Oliver was planning. If I'd known, you'd have done exactly what you did. Marcus, followed orders and hoped for the best. The only difference is you'd have been more careful about it. That's not... He sighed. The board wants to know if you'd consider returning, as director, with a substantial raise and written guarantees about your authority over the Harbinger deal. I laughed, actually laughed. They want me to come back and clean up the mess. Pretend none of this happened. They recognize they made an error in judgment. No, Marcus, they made a calculated decision to back Oliver because they thought he'd make them rich. It backfired. That's not an error in judgment, that's greed facing consequences. So you won't consider it. I'll fulfill my contractual obligations to the Harbinger Fund. I'll ensure the money goes where it's supposed to go. But I'm done with Aurelia Systems. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Oliver Shaw was probably calling his lawyers, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his career. The SEC would be coming for him soon. His pattern had been exposed, his methods laid bare. I'd won. It didn't feel like victory. Exactly. It felt like justice. Cold, calculated, and complete. My phone buzzed. A message from Kenji Tanaka in Tokyo. Impressive work. Miranda, we have an opening for a senior vice president of international development. Interested in discussing. I smiled. Oliver had been wrong about one thing: my career wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, I'd learned the value of building in safeguards, of trusting but verifying, of never assuming that corporate politics was just business. Sometimes it was war, and in war, the winner is often the one who strikes last, strikes hard, and strikes with precision. One signature had indeed ended Oliver's empire, but it hadn't built mine. That would take time, effort, and the kind of careful construction that Oliver had never had the patience for. He'd always been about the quick score, the fast profit, the immediate gratification. I was playing a longer game now, and I was just getting started. The weeks that followed Oliver's downfall were a case study in corporate damage control. Aurelia Systems went into full crisis management mode, hiring external auditors to review every deal Oliver had touched. They found what I'd expected them to find: a web of planned redirections, offshore accounts waiting to be activated, and a timeline that would have seen $75 million disappear into the ether within 6 months. Marcus Whitfield lasted exactly 3 days as director, before the board realized he was so far out of his depth he needed scuba gear. His resignation was even quieter than Oliver's, a footnote in the larger scandal. The Harbinger Fund, after extensive review, decided to proceed with the original agreement. With one modification, they insisted I oversee the implementation as an independent consultant. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "You realize this is unprecedented," Yuki told me over lunch at our usual spot. "A consultant with more authority than the actual corporate executives." "Unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures," I replied. "Besides, Harbinger isn't paying for my loyalty to Aurelia. They're paying for my expertise and my ethics." Speaking of payment, she slid a contract across the table. "The board approved your consulting fee. I think you'll find it satisfactory." I glanced at the number and kept my expression neutral, though internally I was calculating how many years of corporate salary it represented. "It's acceptable." "Acceptable, Miranda. That's more than Oliver was making as CEO. Oliver was overpaid for destroying value. I'm being fairly compensated for preserving it." I signed the contract. "Besides, I have a feeling this won't be my only consulting arrangement." I was right. Within a month, I'd received inquiries from 6 other funds, all wanting to know how to Oliver-proof their agreements. My humiliation at Aurelia had transformed into something else entirely: a reputation as someone who could spot corporate predators and stop them cold. Sarah Chen's article had won her a prestigious journalism award and sparked a series of investigations into similar schemes at other companies. She called me one evening, months after everything had settled. "You know Oliver's been indicted. Right federal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering." I'd heard. I was reviewing contracts for a new client, a renewable energy fund worried about their recent leadership change. David Kim's testimony was particularly damaging. I understand. He seemed almost relieved to finally tell the truth. Said you gave him the courage to come forward. I just reminded him that silence makes us complicit. He found his own courage. "Still, you orchestrated this perfectly. The timing, the pressure points, the way you turned Oliver's strength into weaknesses. If you ever get tired of finance, you should consider investigative journalism." "Thanks, but I'll stick to what I know. Speaking of which, have you looked into Meridian Capital's new CEO? Something about their recent restructuring seems familiar." Sarah laughed. "Once a watchdog, always a watchdog. I'll check it out." The call ended, and I returned to my work. Outside my home office window, Manhattan glittered in the darkness, the city of ambition, where fortunes were made and lost, where power was the ultimate currency, and where sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys won. Janet called the next day. She'd left Aurelia shortly after Oliver's departure, taking a position with a nonprofit that managed educational grants in Southeast Asia. "Did you see the news they're liquidating Oliver's assets to pay restitution? Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Miranda, I wanted to thank you for showing me that standing up to power is possible, that we don't have to just accept corruption as the cost of doing business. We all have to sleep at night. Janet, I just decided my conscience was worth more than my corporate career." "Is that why you turned down Tokyo Kenji said you declined their offer?" "I did. It had been tempting senior VP at a firm that valued integrity, working with people I respected, but something had shifted in me during those weeks of warfare with Oliver. I realized I'm more effective as an independent. No corporate politics, no hierarchy to navigate, just me, my expertise, and the ability to walk away from any deal that doesn't feel right. The corporate world's loss, or its gain, depending on how you look at it, I can do more good from the outside, keeping them honest, than I ever could from inside the system." We chatted a bit more before hanging up. Janet was happy in her new role, feeling like her work mattered. Another life Oliver had tried to destroy, now thriving in spite of him. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. A delivery. A single bottle of champagne with a note. "To the woman who saved our fund, with gratitude, the Harbinger Board." I opened it that evening, toasting silently to the empty air, to battles won and wars finished, to bridges burned and new paths forged, to the sweet taste of revenge served at exactly the right temperature. But mostly, I toasted to the future. Oliver Shaw had taught me valuable lessons about power, about vulnerability, about the importance of building safeguards into everything you touch. He'd tried to destroy me, and instead had created something he never saw coming: a guardian at the gates, someone who knew all the tricks because she'd seen them played by a master. My phone lit up with another email, another fund, another concern about leadership changes, another request for my services. I smiled and opened my laptop. Oliver thought he'd ended my career with that public demotion. Instead, he'd launched it in a direction I'd never imagined, somewhere in federal custody. He was probably cursing my name, blaming me for his downfall. Let him. I had work to do. The Harbinger Fund deal closed successfully 6 months later, every penny accounted for, every project funded, every safeguard working exactly as designed. The infrastructure projects broke ground in Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Kenya. Schools were built, hospitals were equipped, clean water flowed where it hadn't before. I attended the celebration in Singapore, watching corporate executives congratulate themselves on their wisdom and foresight. A few had the grace to acknowledge the near miss with Oliver, but most had already rewritten history to cast themselves as the heroes who'd spotted the danger early. Heinrich found me on the terrace, overlooking the city lights. "You should be in there, taking credit." "For what?" "For what? Doing my job. For saving them from themselves." He raised his glass. "To Miranda Lowell, the woman who froze a fortune with a phone call." That's not quite how it happened. No, but it's how the story will be told. Corporate mythology needs its heroes and villains. Oliver is the villain. You're the hero. Accept it. I prefer the truth. I was a woman scorned who happened to have the receipts. I clinked my glass against his. But if they need a cautionary tale about crossing the wrong person, I'm happy to be it. Any regrets? I thought about it. The career at Aurelia I'd built over 8 years, gone. The corporate ladder I'd been climbing, abandoned. The safe, predictable path I'd been on, destroyed. None, I said finally. Oliver did me a favor, though he'll never know it. He freed me from a system I'd never realized was a cage. And now I make sure other Olivers don't succeed. It's become something of a specialty. Heinrich laughed, the corporate world's avenging angel. Hardly. Just someone who learned that when they go low, you go for the jugular, with documentation. The party continued inside, but I stayed on the terrace, enjoying the quiet. My phone buzzed with messages, new clients, new challenges, new Olivers to stop. The work would never end, because there would always be those who saw corporate funds as their personal piggy banks, who believed their charm and connections put them above consequences. They were wrong. Oliver Shaw had proven that. One signature, one person willing to stand up and say no, one carefully documented trail of evidence, that's all it took to bring down an empire built on lies. I thought back to that conference room at Aurelia, the humiliation burning through me as Oliver announced my demotion. He'd wanted to break me, to remove an obstacle to his plans. Instead, he'd created his own downfall. There was a poetry to it, really, a certain elegant symmetry. He'd frozen my career, so I'd frozen his money. He'd tried to destroy my reputation, so I'd revealed his. He'd thought he was untouchable, and I'd proven that everyone leaves fingerprints. The champagne was excellent, crisp and cold. I raised my glass one more time, this time to the Singapore skyline and all the Olivers out there who thought they were too smart to get caught. "Good luck," I whispered to the night. "You're going to need it." Because Miranda Lowell was watching now, and she'd learned from the best how to play this game. Only she played it better, with patience, precision, and the kind of cold fury that burns everything it touches to ash. Oliver's empire had fallen with one signature withheld, but that was just the beginning. There were other empires built on fraud, other executives who preyed on trust, other funds at risk from those who saw theft as just another business strategy. My phone rang. Sarah Chen again. "Miranda, that tip about Meridian Capital. You were right. Want to take a look at what I found?" I smiled. "Send it over. I'll review it tonight." The work continued. The game went on. But now, the predators had a predator of their own to fear. And she was just getting started.